John Miller had spent nearly his entire life beneath the towering pine canopies of Willamette National Forest, Oregon. With hair as white as snow and eyes a misty gray blue like the sky at dawn, he was affectionately known in the small town by the forest's edge as the Friend of Wood. In a little wooden cabin he had built himself decades ago, John lived alone, accompanied only by the creaking of his old saw and the lingering scent of pine in every breath he took. He was once a skilled carpenter whose hands could transform any log into soulful pieces: a gentle rocking chair for a widowed grandmother, a wooden horse for a child who had never owned a toy, or a picture frame placed on the altar of someone dearly missed. But ever since a workshop accident years ago, when a falling beam injured his right arm, his hands had grown unsteady, slower, but they had never stopped. Now he no longer crafted to sell. Every piece of wood he picked up from the forest he would carve with care, polish by hand, and give away. These small gifts, scented with pine and his kind smile, would find their way into the hands of orphaned children in the town, elderly folks living alone, or women carrying the weight of their families after a season of devastating floods. He never explained why. He only repeated one quiet phrase: "We all need something to hold on to." Each morning, John would grab his cane, put on his old wool coat, pick up his woven basket, and head into the forest. He never ventured far, just wandered the familiar area where a small stream flowed and a heart-shaped rock marked what he called the gate to stillness. That autumn, the leaves fell like flames, crimson, golden, and rust-colored in showers that danced with the wind. That morning was no different: clear skies, crisp air, and an uncanny silence in the woods. John locked his door, hung a sign that read, "Out in the woods, don't worry," and picked up his basket to leave. That walk would become one of the most unforgettable of his life. As he stepped down a small slope near the stream where layers of maple leaves formed a carpet soft as velvet but slick as ice, John lost his footing. Rain from the previous night still lingered in the soil, making every step treacherous for legs that had long lost their youthful strength. He stumbled and then fell. And then he lost his footing. The elderly body pitched forward, tumbling down the hillside, riddled with roots and jagged stones. Everything happened as swiftly as a fleeting misstep in time: a sharp thud against rock, a cry of pain escaping his lips, and then silence. When John opened his eyes, the world tilted in a haze of forest light. Pain shot through his right knee, warm blood soaking the leg of his pants. His forehead burned, and a hot stream of blood trickled into his eyes. He tried to sit up, but could barely lift his upper body before collapsing again into the bed of dry leaves like a felled log in the woods. One hand still clutched a small wooden carving knife, the gift he'd planned to bring back, nearly finished, shaped like an owl mid-flight. It was meant for young Ben, the quiet orphan boy who'd just moved to town the previous month and never spoke in class. But now John couldn't stand. He couldn't call for help, and worst of all, he remembered his phone was still in the car nearly a mile away. No one knew where he was. No one knew the forest had swallowed him whole. Around him was a world so familiar, yet suddenly foreign: the whisper of wind in the treetops, the distant call of birds across the valley. The damp scent of rotting leaves and rain-soaked wood filtered through each fragile breath. No engines, no footsteps. Just one old man lying in the woods, alone, like an old forgotten chair in an abandoned workshop. John closed his eyes. He didn't cry, but deep in his chest, a quiet fear was beginning to swell. Not a fear of death, but a fear of not being able to deliver one final gift. Beneath the canopy, darkening to a dusky purple, as the last light of day brushed against the fading red maple leaves, John lay motionless. His breath shallow, his heartbeat slowing like an old wooden clock winding down. Half conscious, He shivered when a low sound echoed in the distance. It wasn't the crack of branches. It wasn't the moan of wind. It was a growl. Low, deep, and strangely familiar, like something wild called forth from a long-lost memory. He opened his eyes slightly. Across the stream, within the dense underbrush, a silent figure emerged. Its dark brown coat was dappled by sun-scorched patches, and it walked slowly like a shadow born from the forest itself. It was an old mountain lion, the last sovereign of the northern ridge, where now only traces remained of the predators that once made the forest hold its breath. But its eyes were no longer fierce. It didn't bare its teeth. It didn't roar in rage. It simply stood there, its gray-gold eyes locked onto Johnot with the gaze of a predator sizing up prey, but as if it were staring at something familiar, something once known. John wanted to cry out, but his voice caught in his throat. His hand still clutched the wooden knife, not shaking from fear now, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. The lion didn't move closer, nor did it retreat. It stood between the brush and the fallen man, as if guarding him. Then, from deep within its aged chest, it let out a roar. It was not a declaration of dominance. It was not a warning. It was a call of power, one that stirred the silence lying heavy over the forest. The sound rippled outward, touching every blade of grass, every brittle branch, every fallen leaf. A sound full of life that was both message and invitation, almost as if the mountain lion were rousing the forest itself to say, "A man lies here, and he needs help." John wept not from pain, but because he knew he was no longer alone. Under the deepening violet sky of late autumn woods, the roar sounded again, this time sharper, more urgent, like a cry slicing through bark and air alike. The old mountain lion didn't approach John, but it began to do something strange. It roared, turned its head toward the depths of the forest, and roared again as if calling for something not of its kind, but of salvation. John slipped back into unconsciousness, the blood drying slowly on his forehead, his hand still wrapped tightly around the unfinished carving knife. On a trail nearly 2 miles away, an elderly couple from Colorado had paused to drink some water when they were startled by the strange sound. "Did you hear that?" the woman asked, eyes turning toward the direction of the echo. "It's a roar, but not a threatening one. It sounded like it was calling someone." They hesitated. In a forest this deep, hearing a mountain lion's roar should have made them turn back, but something in that voice kept them moving forward. 10 minutes later, following the reverberating sound, they stumbled upon a scene they could hardly believe. A man lay collapsed in the sun, scorched leaves, hat beside him, blood trickling from his head, unconscious. No animal in sight, no more roaring. Only one thing stood out, a large paw print pressed deeply into the damp earth beside him, leading from the brush to the man's side, then disappearing into the forest as if it had never existed. They immediately used their satellite phone to call for help. An hour later, the Forest Preserve's emergency response team arrived. John Miller was stabilized and rushed to the nearest hospital. Doctors said if he'd been found just 1 hour later, hypothermia and blood loss could have taken his life. "He's lucky," one of them remarked. Almost like something woke the forest to summon help. No one ever saw the mountain lion again. No clear tracks, no trail to follow, no proof. But John, when he awoke in the hospital, staring at the white light above, knew one thing with certainty. Out there, in the solitude of the forest, a living being had roared not for territory, but out of compassion. In the small hospital room overlooking the old pine ridge, the afternoon sun stretched its fingers across John Miller's silver hair. He sat propped against his pillow, his wrinkled hand still wrapped in white gauze, eyes locked on the misty window pane. Beside his bed, a young park ranger scribbled into a notebook, jotting down the story no one believed. The lion, it didn't attack, it didn't leave. It roared for help, called a savior, not prey. The ranger paused, uncertain. "You're sure, Mr. Miller? I mean, it sounds like something out of a movie." John gave a tired smile. "I don't blame you, son. I wouldn't believe me either." He fell silent for a moment, then added quietly, as if releasing a long-buried secret that had waited too long to be spoken. "But I recognized it. Those eyes, I could never forget them." He leaned his head back, remembering the scent of the old forest, the chill in the wind, and the image of a trembling lion cub trapped in a snare, its paw bloodied, eyes brimming with tears. Back then, John had been a young, strong carpenter, learning his craft while wandering deep into the forest, searching for good timber. One winter morning, he had stumbled upon the snared cub caught in an illegal trap left by poachers. No one ever knew about it. John had quietly freed the animal, dressed its wounds, and carried it nearly 3 miles through the forest. He released it in a southern valley, rarely traveled, dense with trees that seemed to wrap around secrets that needed no words. "I never told anyone, not because I was afraid," he said slowly, "but because I thought it would forget me. It needed to go back to the wild without remembering who helped it." But now, 20 years later, that very creature, not a cub, but an old mountain lion with a tattered mane and weary eyeshad, returned to protect the man who once saved its life. When the ranger team revisited the accident site, they found large animal tracks-clear prints leading from the brush to where John had fallen, then disappearing back into the woods. No blood, no claw marks, only footsteps, like those of a quiet sentry on patrol. People were puzzled. Some believed, some didn't, but John Hay was certain. That autumn, the Oregon forest was awash in brilliant shades: gold, crimson, burnt, orange quiet embers, echoing the warmth in the heart of an old woodworker. After recovering, John Miller returned to the forest he had loved all his life enough to gather timber, not to carve toys for orphan children, but to offer one final gift. In a worn canvas pouch, he carried a small wooden sculpture he had carved over countless sleepless nights, a human hand gently touching the head of a lion, its eyes half closed, peaceful, as if basking in remembrance. Every line, every grain etched into the wood held emotions he couldn't speak aloud. John chose a low, flat stone near the spot where he had fallen. He placed the sculpture there, then stood in silence for a long time, listening only to the wind moving through the leaves and the soft scent of forest earth wrapping around his feet. "No one believes you, kid," he whispered. "But I do, because I once laid my hand on your mane, and this time you laid your trust on my life." Since then, the townsfolk have shared the strange story of the woodworker and the lion that never harmed a soul. Some rangers claimed they'd seen the silhouette of an old mountain lion, moving slowly but without fear of humans. They called it many names, but John always had one name just for himself: Wind Mane. Each autumn, when the leaves fell like memories across the distant woods, he would sit by his window and whisper into the breeze, "Thank you, my Wind Mane." And then he would keep carving wood, keep living quietly like a thread woven into nature, because he knew that kindness never disappears. It may return as a lion's mane, a roar in the wind, or a quiet step arriving at the exact moment you need it. If you believe that kindness can return in the most unexpected, magical ways, tap like to keep stories like this alive. Subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt tales where humans and nature meet, where love needs no language. Have you ever met a wind mane in your life? A moment where kindness returned in a way you never expected? Share your story with us.